I'm Sarah Mitchell, 32, and I thought I was living the American dream in our suburban Denver home. 8 months pregnant with my first child, I was overwhelmed when my sister Madison threw me the most beautiful baby shower I'd ever seen complete. With matching linens, custom favors, and all my closest friends. The pink and gold decorations were perfect, the games were fun, and for the first time in months, I felt truly celebrated and loved. But 3 days later, I found a folder hidden in my husband's desk drawer labeled Madison Personal. Inside were months of text messages, photos I'd never seen, and a detailed plan that made my blood run cold. The baby shower wasn't about celebrating me or my child. It was her final goodbye party. She'd been systematically stealing my husband, my marriage, and my life, one perfectly planned moment at a time. What I discovered next would change everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and the sister I'd trusted with my deepest secrets. The morning of my baby shower, I woke up to the smell of cinnamon rolls baking downstairs. Madison had arrived at 7 a.m., armed with grocery bags and that brilliant smile that always made me feel like the luckiest sister in the world. She'd insisted on handling everything, the decorations, the food, even the guest list claiming I needed to rest and enjoy being pampered. "You're glowing, Sarah," she said, adjusting the pink and gold balloon arch she'd somehow assembled in my living room while I was still brushing my teeth. "This little princess is going to be so loved." I stood in my doorway, overwhelmed by the transformation. Our modest Denver home had been turned into something from a magazine. Delicate paper flowers cascaded from the ceiling, elegant place settings adorned the dining table, and a beautiful gift station waited in the corner. The attention to detail was breathtaking, from the monogram napkins to the custom favor boxes tied with silk ribbon. "Madison, this is incredible," I whispered, fighting back tears. "I can't believe you did all this." She wrapped her arms around my swollen belly, and I felt my daughter kick in response. "She knows her Aunt Maddie is here." Madison laughed, and the sound was so warm, so genuine, that I wondered how I'd gotten so lucky to have a sister who loved me this much. The kitchen counters were covered with carefully arranged platters, delicate finger sandwiches, perfectly frosted cupcakes, a beautiful fruit display that looked like it belonged in a high-end catering magazine. Madison had even created a special mocktail station with fancy glasses and fresh garnishes, making sure I felt included in the celebration despite not being able to drink alcohol. "How long have you been working on this?" I asked, settling into the chair she'd positioned for me in the living room, complete with cushions and a side table for my water bottle. "Weeks," she admitted, fluffing the streamers above the gift table. "I wanted this to be perfect for you. You've been through so much with this pregnancy, and you deserve a day where you feel completely celebrated." It was true that my pregnancy had been challenging. The morning sickness that had lasted well into my second trimester, the gestational diabetes that had required careful diet monitoring, the high blood pressure that had put me on modified bed rest for the past month. Madison had been there through all of it, bringing me meals when I was too sick to cook, driving me to appointments when Michael couldn't get away from work, holding my hand during the scary moments when we weren't sure if everything was going to be okay. As guests began arriving, I watched Madison float through the room like a graceful hostess, ensuring everyone felt welcome. She'd coordinated with my friends to bring specific dishes, had organized games that weren't too cheesy, and even created a beautiful guest book where everyone could write advice for the new mom. My college roommate Jennifer pulled me aside to gush about how thoughtful Madison was, how she'd called personally to make sure the shower would be perfect. "She really loves you," Jennifer said, squeezing my hand. "The way she talked about wanting this day to be special for you, it brought tears to my eyes. She said you've been her hero through this whole pregnancy, handling all the complications with such grace." I felt my chest swell with gratitude and emotion. Madison had always been the more social sister, the one who could plan events and coordinate people effortlessly. But she'd never undertaken a project this elaborate, this personal, was perfectly tailored to my tastes and needs. The afternoon flew by in a blur of laughter, presence, and joy. Madison had somehow managed to invite everyone who mattered to me, including my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chun, who rarely left her house but had always been kind to me. She'd arranged for my favorite caterer from downtown, the one I'd mentioned wanting to use but thought was too expensive. Every detail reflected not just good planning, but intimate knowledge of my preferences and dreams. During the gift opening, Madison sat beside me, carefully writing down who gave what in a beautiful leather journal she'd brought specifically for the occasion. Her handwriting was perfect, her smile constant, and her attention to me unwavering. She anticipated my needs before I even knew I had them, bringing me water when I got tired, adjusting the cushions behind my back, making sure I had enough cake. "This is from our childhood friend Ashley," Madison said, handing me an elegantly wrapped box. "She couldn't make it from California, but she wanted to make sure you knew she was thinking of you." I opened gift after gift, each one carefully selected and beautifully presented. Madison had clearly coordinated with the gift givers to ensure there were no duplicates, that everything I received was something I genuinely needed or wanted. The organization was flawless, the sentiment behind each gift genuine and touching. "Open this one next," she said, handing me her own elegantly wrapped box. "It's from me." Inside was a stunning silver locket engraved with, "For the best sister and soon-to-be best mom." The inscription continued on the back, "Love always, Madison." I was crying before I even opened it to see the tiny photo of us from last Christmas, both of us laughing at something Michael had said. "Madison," I sobbed, "this is too much. You've already done so much." She dabbed at my tears with a tissue that appeared from nowhere. "Nothing is too much for you, Sarah. You deserve the world, and I want to make sure you know how loved you are." The locket felt substantial in my hands, clearly expensive, clearly chosen with care. The photograph inside captured a moment of pure happiness, both of us relaxed and joyful, the kind of candid moment that showed the genuine love between us. I fastened it around my neck immediately, feeling the weight of it against my chest like a tangible reminder of our bond. As the party wound down and guests began leaving, each one hugged me and complimented the beautiful shower. Madison had created something magical, something that made me feel cherished and celebrated during a time when I'd been feeling anxious and overwhelmed about impending motherhood. "Your sister's amazing," my friend Lisa whispered as she gathered her purse and leftover cake. "I've never seen a baby shower this beautifully organized." She thought of everything. And she had. The take-home favors were perfect little packages with personalized tags. The decorations were Instagram-worthy, but not overdone. The timing had been flawless to accommodate my energy levels and physical comfort. Madison had somehow managed to throw the kind of party I'd always dreamed of but never would have been able to plan for myself. "Thank you," I told her as we sat surrounded by gifts and the gentle chaos of a successful party. "This was perfect. You made me feel like the most important person in the world." Madison smiled and squeezed my hand, the silver bracelet she always wore catching the afternoon light streaming through our windows. "You are the most important person in my world, Sarah. Don't ever forget that." As I sat there, surrounded by evidence of love and generosity, wearing the beautiful locket Madison had given me, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the family I'd been born into and the family I was about to create. My daughter would grow up knowing her Aunt Madison would benefit from the same love and support that had made this day possible. I had no idea that in 3 days, everything I believed about love, family, and trust would be shattered beyond recognition. 3 days after the shower, I was still riding the high of feeling so loved and supportive. The house was finally clean, Thank you notes were half written, and I'd spent the morning organizing all the beautiful gifts in what would soon be my daughter's nursery. Michael had been working late every night that week, preparing for a big presentation, so I'd been enjoying the quiet time to nest and prepare. I was looking for our tax documents in Michael's home office when I found it. The folder was tucked behind a stack of insurance papers labeled simply Madison Personal in Michael's careful handwriting. My heart did a little flip. Why would he have a folder about my sister? Maybe he was planning a surprise for her birthday or keeping track of family gifts. I almost put it back without looking, but something made me pause. The folder felt substantial, thick with papers. I opened it with innocent curiosity, expecting to find gift receipts or party planning notes. Instead, I found myself staring at printed screenshots of text messages between Michael and Madison. Dating back 6 months, the first few messages seemed normal enough. Madison asking about my doctor's appointments, Michael updating her on my pregnancy symptoms. But as I kept reading, the tone shifted. The messages became more frequent, more intimate. Madison was texting Michael multiple times a day, and he was responding with an enthusiasm I rarely saw in his communications with me anymore. My hands started shaking as I read deeper. There were messages about my difficult first trimester, but instead of concern, there was something else. Madison writing, "She's been so emotional lately. You must be exhausted dealing with her mood swings." Michael responding, "You understand me better than anyone. I don't know what I'd do without you to talk to." The messages progressed from emotional support to something much more dangerous. Madison sympathizing with Michael about my pregnancy. Complaints, him confiding his fears about fatherhood. Both of them bonding over what they portrayed as my increasing neediness and irrationality. They were discussing my private moments, my vulnerabilities, my fears about childbirth and motherhood. As if I were a burden they both had to manage, but it was the photos that made my world collapse entirely. Pictures of Madison I'd never seen. The 4 professional headshots, candid shots, photos of her in outfits I didn't recognize. And mixed in with those were screenshots of more intimate conversations, messages that made my stomach turn. "I can't stop thinking about you," from Michael's. Number. "Last night was incredible," from Madison's. "We have to be more careful, but I don't want to stop," from Michael again. I sank into Michael's desk chair, the folder scattered across my lap, my 8-month pregnant belly making it difficult to breathe. The dates on the messages told a story I couldn't deny. The affair had started during my worst bout of morning sickness, when I'd been barely able to leave bed for weeks. Madison had been coming over daily then, supposedly to help with cooking and cleaning while Michael was at work. But according to these messages, Michael had been leaving work early those days, coming home while Madison was still at the house. While I was upstairs nauseous and exhausted, they were downstairs falling in love. The cruelest part was how they talked about the baby shower. Madison had suggested it as a way to keep Sarah happy and distracted while they figured out their next steps. Michael had worried about the expense, but Madison had assured him it would be worth it to maintain the facade a little longer. The beautiful day I'd treasured, the overwhelming love I'd felt, the gratitude I'd poured out to my sister, it had all been a performance. A way to buy time while they planned their future together. I found hotel receipts tucked behind the printed messages. The Ritz-Carlton downtown, the same weekend Michael had told me he was at a work conference in Colorado Springs. The dates matched perfectly with the weekend when Madison had claimed to be visiting our aunt in Fort Collins. They'd been together. While I was home alone, practicing breathing exercises and preparing for single motherhood without even knowing it. There were financial documents, too. Printouts of our joint bank account showing charges I'd never questioned. Expensive dinners I'd assumed were business meetings. Shopping trips I thought were for work clothes. Even the down payment for the baby shower venue, which I'd been grateful that Michael had agreed to, had been part of their plan. The final document in the folder was a handwritten note from Madison, tucked inside a greeting card. The front of the card showed a pregnant woman in silhouette, with "Congratulations on your new beginning" printed in elegant script. Inside, Madison had written, "Michael, I know this is complicated, but I believe everything happens for a reason. Once the baby comes and things settle down, we can finally be together the way we're meant to be. I love you more than I ever thought possible. Thank you for making me feel like the most important woman in your world." I stared at that card for a long time, my daughter kicking frantically inside me as if she could sense my distress. The sister who had held my hand through every difficult moment of my pregnancy, who had thrown me the most beautiful celebration of my life, who had looked me in the eyes and told me I was the most important person in her world, had been lying to me for months. The baby shower hadn't been about celebrating me or my daughter. It had been Madison's goodbye party, her final gift before she took everything that mattered to me. I spent the next several hours piecing together the timeline of my own betrayal, cross-referencing the messages with my pregnancy journal and calendar. The picture that emerged was so methodical, so calculated, that I had to keep reminding myself this wasn't some elaborate nightmare. The affair had begun exactly 14 weeks into my pregnancy, the day after my worst morning sickness episode. I remembered that day clearly. I'd been vomiting for 12 hours straight and had finally called Madison in tears, begging her to come help me. She'd arrived within an hour, taken one look at me, and insisted on staying the night to make sure I was okay, according to the messages. That was the night Michael had really seen Madison for the first time. While I was passed out from exhaustion and dehydration, they'd stayed up talking in the living room. Madison had apparently been so understanding about Michael's fears regarding my pregnancy, his concerns about becoming a father, his feeling that I'd become someone he didn't recognize. The messages showed how Madison had positioned herself as the solution to all of Michael's concerns. Where I was sick and tired, she was energetic and supportive. Where I was worried about finances and the future, she was optimistic and encouraging. Where I was physically changing and emotionally volatile, she was stable and understanding. What made it worse was seeing my own life events reflected through their secret conversations. My 20-week ultrasound, where we learned we were having a girl, had been twisted into a discussion about how overwhelmed I'd seemed by the news. My excitement about choosing names had been characterized as obsessive and controlling. Even my joy about feeling the baby move had been dismissed as constant complaining about being uncomfortable. Madison had been systematically reframing every aspect of my pregnancy experience, turning my natural concerns and excitement into evidence that I was difficult to live with. She'd made Michael feel like he was the victim in our marriage, like he deserved sympathy and understanding that I was apparently incapable of providing. I found Madison's calendar tucked behind the messages, and the pattern became even clearer. Every doctor's appointment I'd attended, Madison had known about in advance. Every time I'd had a difficult day, she'd somehow appeared at our house shortly after Michael got home from work. Every weekend, Michael had claimed to be busy with work. Projects, Madison had been coincidentally available to keep me company. The most chilling discovery was a detailed list in Madison's handwriting titled Sarah's Schedule. She'd been tracking my prenatal yoga classes, my grocery shopping routine, my weekly coffee dates with friends. She'd been monitoring my life, like a stalker, timing her visits and calls to Michael around my absences. Even more disturbing were the notes about my health. Madison had been keeping track of my pregnancy symptoms, my doctor's recommendations, even my weight gain. She'd used this information to bond with Michael, positioning herself as someone who understood my health better than I did. When I'd been put on bed rest for 2 weeks due to high blood pressure, Madison had convinced Michael that I was using the pregnancy to manipulate him into staying home more. The messages revealed how they'd been planning their future together while I was planning our nursery. They'd discussed waiting until after the baby was born to make their relationship public, agreeing that it would be easier on everyone if I had time to adjust to motherhood before dealing with a divorce. Madison had even suggested that she could help with childcare, making the transition smoother for the baby. They'd been making decisions about my daughter's future, my future, our family's future, without me having any idea that my life was being planned by committee. The baby shower had been the final step in their timeline, one last gesture to keep me happy and unsuspecting while they prepared for their new life together. Reading through Michael's responses to Madison's suggestions, I saw a man I didn't recognize. This wasn't the husband who'd held my hand during our first ultrasound or who'd spent hours researching car seats and cribs. This was someone who'd been convinced that I was the problem in our marriage, that my pregnancy had somehow made me unreasonable and demanding. Madison had been so skilled at this manipulation that she'd even convinced Michael that their affair was somehow beneficial to me. She'd argued that having someone to share the burden of my emotional needs was actually helping our marriage. She'd positioned herself as the supportive sister who was sacrificing her own happiness to help keep our family together. Even while she was actively working to destroy it, the final piece of the timeline was the most recent message. Sent just yesterday, Madison had written, "The shower was perfect. She suspects nothing. After the baby comes, we can finally stop pretending." Michael had responded, "I can't wait to be with you openly. Thank you for being so patient with this situation." I realized that while I'd been writing thank you notes for baby gifts and feeling grateful for my sister's love, she'd been planning the final stages of taking my husband and destroying my marriage. The locket she'd given me, the one I'd cried over because it seemed so heartfelt, had been a farewell gift from the sister who was about to become my son's stepmother. The irony wasn't lost on me that my pregnancy had been the catalyst for my marriage's destruction. As I sat in Michael's office, surrounded by evidence of his betrayal, I felt my daughter moving restlessly inside me as if she too could sense that our world was crumbling. My pregnancy had been difficult from the beginning, but I'd never imagined that my struggles were being used as ammunition against me. Looking back through my medical records, which I'd kept meticulously organized in a folder labeled Baby Mitchell, I could see how Madison had weaponized every complication, every moment of vulnerability. The morning sickness had been brutal. During my first trimester, I'd lost 12 pounds in 6 weeks, couldn't keep anything down, and had been so dehydrated that my doctor had recommended 4 fluids. Madison had been my lifeline during those weeks, bringing me crackers and ginger tea, holding my hair back when I was sick, reassuring me that everything would be okay, but the messages revealed what she'd really been thinking. While she was rubbing my back and telling me how strong I was, she was texting Michael about how dramatic I was being, how I was milking the symptoms for attention. She'd convinced him that other women handled pregnancy much better, that my difficulties were somehow a character flaw rather than a medical condition. When I'd been diagnosed with gestational diabetes at 28 weeks, Madison had been the first person I'd called. I'd been scared and overwhelmed by the dietary restrictions and blood sugar monitoring, worried about how it might affect the baby. Madison had driven me to the appointment with the nutritionist, had helped me reorganize my kitchen to accommodate the new meal plan, had even offered to cook for me twice a week. Reading the messages from that time period made me feel sick all over again. Madison had been telling Michael that I was overreacting to a minor condition, that I was using it as an excuse to be high maintenance. She had suggested that I was secretly enjoying the extra attention and medical care, that I was playing the victim to manipulate him into being more supportive. The bed rest prescription had been the worst period of my pregnancy. At 34 weeks, my blood pressure had spiked dangerously high, and my doctor had ordered complete bed rest to prevent preeclampsia. I'd been terrified about the baby coming early, about complications during delivery, about losing the pregnancy. After carrying her for so long, Madison had been incredible during those 2 weeks, or so I'd thought. She brought me meals, had organized my friends to take shifts keeping me company, had even taken time off work to make sure I wasn't alone during the day. She'd listened to my fears about the baby's health, had reassured me that everything would be fine, had made me feel like I had a support system I could rely on. But her messages to Michael during that time revealed a different story entirely. She'd been complaining about having to babysit me, about how I was being dramatic about what she called normal pregnancy issues. She'd convinced Michael that bed rest was something I'd requested rather than something my doctor had ordered, that I was enjoying being waited on and taking advantage of everyone's concern. Most cruelly, she'd used my private conversations with her against me. When I'd confided my fears about childbirth, about whether I'd be a good mother, about how overwhelmed I felt by the responsibility of bringing a life into the world, she'd shared those intimate moments with Michael as evidence that I was unstable and not ready for motherhood. The messages showed how Madison had been positioning herself as the stable, reliable woman who would be better equipped to help raise my daughter. She'd been subtly suggesting that I was too anxious, too emotional, too high maintenance to be a good mother. She'd been laying the groundwork for Michael to see her as the better choice, not just as a wife, but as a mother figure for our child. Reading through my own medical records with this new context was devastating. Every appointment where I'd felt supported by Madison's presence, every moment when I'd been grateful for her advocacy with doctors and nurses, every time I'd felt lucky to have such a caring sister, all of it had been performance art designed to win Michael's admiration and trust. The most painful discovery was a series of messages from the week. I'd been hospitalized for monitoring. My blood pressure had been so high that my doctor had wanted to keep me under observation, possibly deliver the baby early if things didn't improve. I'd been scared and alone, with Michael stuck at work and unable to get away immediately. Madison had rushed to the hospital, had stayed with me through the night, had advocated with the nursing staff for better care. She'd held my hand when I'd cried about the possibility of an emergency C-section, had helped me practice breathing exercises, had made me feel like I wasn't facing this crisis alone, but she'd been texting Michael throughout that entire night, describing my emotional meltdown and hysterics. She'd characterized my legitimate medical concerns as attention-seeking behavior and had suggested that I was enjoying the drama of being in the hospital. She'd even implied that I was somehow responsible for my own high blood pressure, that it was the result of stress I was creating for myself. The final message from that night was the most devastating. She's going to be fine, but this whole experience has shown me how much she needs constant reassurance and attention. I don't know how you deal with this level of neediness every day. You deserve someone who can be strong for you, not someone who falls apart at the first sign of trouble. I realized that Madison had been systematically documenting every moment of vulnerability during my pregnancy, building a case against me that she'd been presenting to my husband piece by piece. She turned my medical complications into character, flaws, my fears into evidence of instability, my gratitude for her support into proof that I was dependent and demanding. The woman who'd been my greatest source of comfort during the most difficult months of my life had been using my trust and vulnerability to destroy my marriage and steal my future. Sitting in that chair, surrounded by the wreckage of my marriage, I found myself thinking about our childhood photo albums. There was one picture in particular that had always bothered me, though I'd never been able to articulate why. Madison and I were maybe 7 and 9 years old, standing in front of our childhood home in Boulder. I was holding a blue ribbon from the school science fair, grinning proudly at the camera. Madison was standing slightly behind me, smiling too. But if you looked closely, and I'd never really looked closely until now, you could see something else in her expression, Our parents had always prided themselves on treating us equally, but the reality was more complicated. Madison had been born beautiful, with perfect features and natural charm that drew people to her immediately. I'd been born practical, with a methodical mind and a tendency to work hard for everything I achieved. Our parents had loved us both, but they'd needed me in ways they'd never needed Madison. When Dad had been laid off from his engineering job, it was my math skills that had helped him manage the family budget. When Mom had been overwhelmed with managing the household, it was my organizational abilities that had kept things running. Madison had been the family's pride and joy, but I'd been the family's problem solver. The pattern had established itself early. Madison would charm her way through difficulties, while I would work my way through them. Madison would be admired for her natural gifts, while I would be praised for my effort and persistence. It should have been complimentary, but somewhere along the way, it had become competitive. I remembered high school with new clarity. Madison had been homecoming queen, prom queen, the girl every boy wanted to date. I'd been valedictorian, president of the debate team, the girl colleges wanted to recruit. We'd both been successful, but in completely different ways. And I'd been naive enough to think that meant we weren't in competition, but there had been signs, moments when Madison's mask had slipped just slightly. My senior year, when I'd been accepted to Stanford with a full scholarship, Madison had been genuinely happy for me. But she'd also made little comments about how lucky I was to be naturally smart, how easy things always seemed to come to me. She'd made my achievements sound like accidents rather than the result of years of hard work. When I'd met Michael during my junior year at Stanford, Madison had been the first person I'd called to tell about him. She'd been so excited, so supportive, so eager to meet this amazing man who'd captured her sister's heart. When I'd brought him home for Christmas, Madison had been the perfect hostess, charming and welcoming and everything a boyfriend could want in a future sister-in-law. But I remembered now how she'd monopolized his attention that visit. She'd insisted on showing him all the family photo albums, had regaled him with stories about our childhood that somehow always made her sound adventurous and me sound cautious. She'd made sure he knew about all her accomplishments, all her interests, all the ways she was different from me. I'd been proud of her that Christmas. Proud that my sister was so confident and engaging. Michael had been impressed by her, had told me later how lucky I was to have such a supportive family. I'd agreed, feeling grateful that the two most important people in my life had hit it off so well. The pattern had continued through the years. Every major milestone in my relationship with Michael had somehow become an opportunity for Madison to insert herself into our lives. When Michael had proposed, Madison had been the one who'd helped him choose the ring, who'd given him advice about the proposal, who'd been the first person he'd called after I'd said yes. When we'd been planning our wedding, Madison had been my maid of honor, and she'd been incredible at it. She'd organized the bachelorette party, had helped me choose my dress, had given a beautiful speech at the reception about how happy she was to gain a brother. She'd been everything a sister should be, and I'd felt so grateful to have her in my corner. But I realized now that she'd also been building a relationship with Michael that was separate from me. She'd been the one he'd confided in when he'd been nervous about the marriage, the one who'd reassured him that he was making the right choice. She'd been establishing herself as someone he could trust, someone who understood him in ways that complemented rather than competed with me, or so I thought. The truth was that Madison had been studying Michael from the beginning, learning what he valued, what he needed, what he found attractive. She'd been positioning herself as the alternative to me, the woman who possessed all the qualities I lacked. Where I was serious, she was playful. Where I was practical, she was spontaneous. Where I was independent, she was attentive. I thought about all the times over the years when Madison had been just a little too interested in the details of my marriage. She'd ask about our arguments, our plans, our intimate moments with a level of curiosity that I'd interpreted as sisterly concern. She'd offer advice about how to handle conflicts with Michael, suggestions that I'd been grateful for, but that I now realized had been designed to create distance between us. She'd been so skilled at this manipulation that she'd made me complicit in my own betrayal. I'd been the one inviting her into our lives, sharing my problems with her, asking for her help with my marriage. I'd been so grateful for her support that I'd never questioned her motives, never wondered why she was so invested in the intimate details of my relationship with my husband. The photo albums told a story I'd never wanted to see. Madison had always been competing with me, had always been measuring herself against my achievements, had always been looking for ways to prove that she was the better sister, the better woman, the better choice. And I'd been too trusting, too. Grateful, too blind to see what was happening until it was too late. After discovering the folder, I couldn't stop myself from digging deeper. It was like picking at a wound, painful but compulsive. I needed to understand the full scope of what had been happening in my own home, right under my nose. I started with our joint bank account, something I'd always trusted Michael to manage while I focused on my career and the pregnancy. I'd been so grateful that he'd taken charge of our finances, especially during the months when I'd been too sick to think clearly about money. Now, looking at the statements with fresh eyes, I saw a pattern of deception that made my stomach turn. The charges I'd noticed but never questioned suddenly told a clear story. That $200 charge at Nordstrom in February, when Michael had said he was buying himself work clothes, had actually been the day Madison had posted Instagram photos of herself in a new dress I'd never seen before. The expensive dinner at the Capitol Grill that same month, which Michael had claimed was a business dinner, had coincided with Madison's social media posts about having the most romantic evening. There were hotel charges I'd never seen before, carefully hidden among business expenses. The Ritz-Carlton, the Four Seasons, even a weekend at a luxury resort in Vail that I'd never heard about. The dates corresponded perfectly with weekends when Michael had claimed to be at work conferences, and Madison had been mysteriously unavailable for our usual sister dinners, but it was the smaller purchases that hurt the most. Regular charges at the florist near Madison's apartment, expensive wine purchases that never made it to our house, lingerie purchases from boutiques I'd never shopped at. Michael had been courting my sister with our money, buying her gifts and experiences while I was home struggling with morning sickness and preparing for our baby. The most painful discovery was a charge for $3,000 at the jewelry store where we bought my engagement ring. The date was just 2 weeks ago, right before the baby shower. When I called the store and spoke to our usual salesperson, she was happy to tell me about the beautiful necklace Mr. Mitchell had chosen for his sister-in-law. She described a piece that was far more expensive than anything Michael had ever bought for me, including my wedding ring. I realized that Madison had been wearing this necklace at the baby shower, hidden under her high-neck dress, while I'd been admiring her elegant appearance and feeling grateful for her sophisticated taste. She'd been wearing jewelry that my husband had bought her with our money, probably as a thank you gift for organizing the party that was meant to be my farewell celebration. The financial evidence extended beyond just purchases. I found evidence that Michael had been paying for Madison's car repairs, her health insurance premiums, even her rent on at least 3 occasions. He'd been supporting her financially while I'd been working part-time and saving money for the baby's arrival. The woman who'd been stealing my husband had been living off our resources, funded by the money I'd been earning and the savings I'd been contributing to our joint account. There were credit card statements I'd never seen before, for cards I didn't know existed. Michael had opened a separate account, one that he'd been using exclusively for his relationship with Madison. The charges on these statements read like a romance novel expensive restaurants, weekend getaways, jewelry stores, luxury hotels. He'd been living a double life, and I'd been completely excluded from the financial reality of our marriage. I found receipts tucked into his wallet, evidence of a lifestyle I'd never been invited to share. Spa treatments for two, couples massages, wine tastings at exclusive venues. While I'd been home dealing with pregnancy symptoms and preparing for motherhood, Michael and Madison had been living like a couple on their honeymoon, exploring Denver's most romantic spots and building memories that should have been mine. The documentation was so thorough that it felt almost like evidence prepared for a divorce case. I wondered if that's exactly what it was, if Michael had been keeping careful records of his expenses because he was already planning to leave me and wanted to account for every dollar he'd spent on his new relationship. But the cruelest evidence was the planning documents I found for trips that hadn't happened yet. There were hotel reservations for next month after my due date. For a weekend in Aspen, there were tickets to a concert in September for seats that cost more than we'd spent. On our last anniversary, there were dinner reservations at restaurants I'd mentioned wanting to try, places Michael had always said were too expensive for us. They'd been planning their future together with the kind of detail and investment that Michael had never put into our marriage. While I had been researching car seats and cribs, they'd been researching romantic getaways and couples experiences. While I'd been planning our daughter's nursery, they'd been planning their life together. I found evidence that Madison had been helping Michael plan these expenditures, that she'd been researching restaurants and hotels and activities for their future dates. She'd been more involved in planning their relationship than I'd ever been allowed to be in planning my own marriage. She'd been the kind of partner to Michael that I'd always wanted to be consulted, included, prioritized. Final piece of financial evidence was the most devastating. I found a printout of a savings account I'd never heard of, one that Michael had been contributing to for months. The balance was substantial, more than $15,000, and it was clearly intended as a fresh start fund for his new life with Madison. While I'd been worrying about our financial readiness for the baby, Michael had been secretly building a nest egg for his future without us. He'd been planning to leave me with a newborn, with no savings, with no financial security, while he started over with my sister using money that should have been earmarked for our daughter's future. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial, practical, and calculated in ways that showed just how long he'd been planning this deception. That night, I pulled out my high school yearbook for the first time in years. I needed to understand if I'd been blind to Madison's nature, or if she'd genuinely changed into someone I didn't recognize. The answers I found were more disturbing than I'd expected. Our high school yearbook was filled with the typical inscriptions from friends and classmates, but Madison's message stood out now in ways it never had before. She'd written a full page about our special bond and how proud she was to be my sister. But reading it now, I could see the subtle digs embedded in her seemingly loving words. Sarah has always been the smart one, the one who gets things through. Hard work and determination, she'd written. I've always admired how she never gives up, even when things don't come naturally to her. She's taught me that you don't have to be naturally gifted to be successful. You just have to be willing to work harder than everyone else. At the time, I'd been touched by what seemed like genuine admiration. Now I could see it was a backhanded compliment, a way of positioning my achievements as the result of effort rather than ability, while implying that her own success was the result of natural talent. She'd continued, I know Sarah will always be successful because she's willing to do whatever it takes to get what she wants. She's never been the type to give up on something. She set her mind to, even when other people might think it's time to let go. That persistence will serve her well in life. The message ended with, I can't wait to see what the future holds for both of us. I know we'll always be in each other's lives, no matter what. Some bonds are just too strong to break. Reading those words now, with the knowledge of what she'd been planning and executing, felt like being punched in the stomach. She'd been laying the groundwork for this betrayal even then, positioning herself as the naturally gifted sister while subtly undermining my achievements and character. I started remembering other incidents from high school with new clarity. Senior year, when I'd been dating Jake Morrison, Madison had been unusually interested in our relationship. She'd asked detailed questions about our dates, our conversations, our future plans. I'd been happy to share everything with her, grateful to have a sister who was so invested in my happiness. But I remembered now how Jake had started mentioning Madison more frequently in our conversations, how he began comparing us in subtle ways, noting how fun and spontaneous Madison was compared to how serious and focused I was. How he'd started suggesting that maybe we should double date more often or include Madison in more of our activities. The relationship had ended when Jake had told me he thought we wanted different things out of life. He'd said I was too intense and that he needed someone who was more flexible and easier to be around. At the time, I'd been heartbroken, but had accepted his reasoning. Now I wondered if Madison had been subtly influencing his perception of me the same way she'd been influencing Michael's. I thought about college and how Madison had insisted on visiting me at Stanford multiple times each semester. She'd always had a good reason. She wanted to see the campus. She missed me. She was thinking about applying to graduate school there. But during those visits, she had always made an effort to meet my friends, my professors, my boyfriends. She'd been charming and engaging with everyone, but I started remembering little comments she'd made about my social life, my study habits, my choices. Sarah's always been so focused on her grades. She'd tell people, sometimes I worry she's missing out on the fun parts of college, or my sister is so dedicated to her studies. I wish she'd learn to relax and enjoy herself more. These comments had always been delivered with a loving smile and a concerned tone, but they'd had the effect of making me seem uptight and overly serious to people who didn't know me well. Madison had been subtly undermining my social relationships for years, positioning herself as the more fun, more balanced alternative to her rigid, work-obsessed sister. I remember graduate school when I'd been pursuing my MBA and had been stressed about the workload and competition. Madison had been incredibly supportive, calling me regularly to check on my progress and offering encouragement during difficult times. But she'd also been carefully documenting my struggles, my moments of doubt, my complaints about the pressure I was under. When I'd started dating Michael during my second year of graduate school, Madison had been the first person I told about him. She'd been so excited, so eager to hear every detail about our relationship. I thought she was just being a supportive sister, someone who was genuinely invested in my happiness and success. But now, I realized she'd been gathering intelligence about what made Michael attractive to me, what qualities he valued in a partner, what our relationship dynamic was like. She'd been learning about my relationship so she could position herself as the better alternative, the woman who could give Michael everything I gave him plus all the things I couldn't. The most painful realization was that Madison had been studying me my entire life, learning my weaknesses, my insecurities, my patterns. She'd been patient and methodical, building relationships with the people who mattered to me, gathering information about my life and my choices, positioning herself as the more appealing alternative to her flawed older sister. I thought about all the times I'd confided in Madison about my relationship with Michael, about my fears and concerns and hopes for our future. I told her about our arguments, our differences, our struggles to balance two demanding careers with building a life together. I'd shared my most intimate concerns about whether Michael and I were truly compatible, whether we wanted the same things out of life. Madison had been the perfect confidant, offering advice and support and reassurance. She'd helped me work through Conflicts with Michael had encouraged me to be more understanding of his needs and perspectives. She'd been the voice of reason when I'd been frustrated with him, the one who'd reminded me of his good qualities when I'd been focusing on his flaws, but she'd been using those conversations to build her own relationship with him, to position herself as the woman who truly understood his needs and could meet them better than I could. She'd been my marriage counselor and my husband's mistress simultaneously, using the intimate knowledge I'd given her to still the man I trusted her to help me keep. I don't know how long I sat in that office chair, surrounded by the evidence of my own destruction. Time seemed to have stopped, leaving me suspended in a reality I couldn't quite accept. My daughter was moving constantly inside me as if she could sense the emotional earthquake that was reshaping our world. The pregnancy journal I'd been keeping lay open on the desk beside Michael's folder of betrayal. I'd started writing in it during my first trimester, documenting every milestone, every symptom, every moment of wonder and fear about becoming a mother. It had been my way of connecting with my daughter before she was born, of creating a record of our journey together that she could read someday. Reading through my own words now was excruciating. Page after page of gratitude for Madison's support, expressions of love for Michael, excitement about our growing family. I'd written about how lucky I felt to have such an incredible support system, how grateful I was that my sister and husband got along so well, how perfect our life seemed despite the challenges of pregnancy. Found out today we're having a girl. Michael cried when the technician told us. Madison was so excited when we called her, she immediately started talking about all the beautiful clothes she's going to buy for her niece. I feel so lucky that our daughter will have such loving people in her life. Madison brought me soup when I was feeling sick today. She stayed and rubbed my feet while we watched movies. Michael had to work late again, but I didn't mind because Madison kept me company. I don't know what I'd do without her. Doctor put me on bed rest today. I'm scared about the baby coming early, but Madison has been amazing. She's taken time off work to help me, and Michael seems so relieved that I have support during the day. I feel guilty that everyone has to take care of me, but Madison keeps telling me that's what family is for. Madison threw me the most incredible baby shower today. I've never felt so loved and celebrated. Every detail was perfect, and I could tell how much thought she put into making this day special for me. I cried when she gave me the locket. It means everything to know that our bond is so strong. Our daughter is going to be so lucky to have Madison as an aunt. Each entry was a testament to my complete obliviousness, my total trust in the two people who were systematically destroying my life. I've been documenting my own betrayal, creating a record of my gratitude to the very people who were planning to abandon me. But it was the entry I'd written just 2 days ago that broke me completely. Still feeling emotional about the baby shower, I keep thinking about how blessed I am to have Madison and Michael in my life. This pregnancy has been hard, but having their support has made all the difference. I know that no matter what challenges come with being a new mom, I won't have to face them alone. Our daughter is going to grow up surrounded by so much love. I'd written those words while Madison and Michael were planning their future together, while they were discussing how to manage the situation of my impending motherhood, while they were counting down the days until they could finally be together openly. I'd been celebrating their love and support while they were preparing to leave me to raise. Our daughter alone thought the physical pain of this realization was overwhelming. My chest felt tight, my breathing became shallow, and I could feel my blood pressure rising in a way that scared me. The baby was moving frantically now, responding to the stress hormones flooding my system. I knew I needed to calm down, needed to protect her from the chaos that was consuming me. But I couldn't seem to stop the spiral of grief and rage that was taking over. I thought about calling my doctor, but what would I say? That I discovered. My husband was having an affair with my sister, and the stress was affecting my pregnancy. that the two people I'd trusted most in the world had been lying to me for months, and I was afraid I might go into premature labor from the shock. I thought about calling a friend, but I realized I had no idea how to explain what was happening. The story was so outrageous, so cruel, that I wasn't sure anyone would believe it. And I couldn't bear the thought of having to say the words out loud, of making this nightmare real by sharing it with someone else. The isolation was crushing. For months, I'd felt supported and loved, surrounded by people who cared about me and my baby. Now I realized that support had been an illusion, that I'd been completely alone without even knowing it. The two people I'd counted on most had been conspiring against me, using my trust and vulnerability to build their own relationship while systematically dismantling mine. I started crying then, deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere I didn't even know existed. I cried for the marriage I thought I had, for the sister I thought I knew, for the future I'd been planning that would never exist. I cried for my daughter who would be born into a broken family, who would grow up knowing that her father had chosen her aunt over her mother. But most of all, I cried for myself, for the woman who had been so trusting, so grateful, so blind to what was happening right in front of her, for the woman who had been working so hard to be a good wife, a good sister, a good mother, while the people she was trying to please were laughing at her efforts behind her back. The crying jag lasted until I was completely empty, until there were no more tears left and I was just sitting in Michael's chair, surrounded by the evidence of my own destruction, feeling hollowed out and strangely calm. My daughter had stopped moving, as if she too was exhausted by the emotional storm. In the silence that followed, I realized something had shifted inside me. The initial shock and disbelief were fading, replaced by something clearer and more focused. I was still devastated, still heartbroken, still terrified about the future. But underneath all of that, I could feel something else emerging. Anger, not the hot, explosive anger that burns out quickly, but the cold, calculating anger that lasts. The anger that comes from realizing you've been underestimated, that people have assumed you're too weak or too naive to fight back. The anger that comes from understanding that the people who were supposed to protect you have been the ones hurting you all along. I looked at the folder of evidence, at my pregnancy journal, at the comfortable life I'd built that was about to disappear. Michael and Madison thought they'd been so clever, so careful, so thorough in their deception. They thought they'd planned for everything, considered every angle, prepared for every contingency, but there was one thing they hadn't planned for: me fighting back. They'd assumed I would be devastated and helpless, that I would crumble under the weight of their betrayal and quietly accept whatever scraps they were willing to throw me. They'd counted on my gratitude, my trust, my tendency to put other people's needs before my own. They'd made a mistake. They'd underestimated the woman they'd been deceiving, the mother they'd been planning to abandon. And now, sitting in the ruins of my old life, I started planning for the new one I was going to build with or without them. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The emotional breakdown had purged something from my system, leaving room for the analytical mind that had gotten me through business school and built my career. I was still hurt, still betrayed, still carrying a broken heart, but I was no longer helpless. I spent the early hours while Michael was still sleeping making lists. Not emotional, scattered thoughts, but organized, strategic plans. I needed to protect myself and my daughter, and that required careful thinking, not just raw emotion. First, I researched divorce lawyers in Denver, focusing on firms that specialize in high-asset divorces and custody cases. I wasn't just looking for legal representation. I was looking for someone who would understand the complexity of my situation and fight for the financial security my daughter would need. I found 3 attorneys with excellent reputations and scheduled consultations for the following week. Telling their assistants I was exploring my options in a potentially difficult situation. Next, I started documenting everything I'd discovered. I photographed every page in Michael's folder, every bank statement, every receipt. I made copies of our joint account information, our tax returns, our mortgage documents, our investment portfolios. If this was going to become a legal battle, I wanted to make sure I had every piece of evidence I might need. Researched our financial situation with the thoroughness I'd once applied to merger deals at work. We had more assets than I'd realized. Michael had been managing our money well, even while he'd been stealing from it to fund his affair. The house had significant equity, our retirement accounts were substantial, and we had investments I'd forgotten about. Madison and Michael might have thought they were leaving me with nothing, but they were wrong. I also started researching Madison's financial situation. I knew she'd been struggling with her marketing consultant business, that she'd been talking about needing to find more stable income. The charges I'd found suggested that Michael had been supporting her more than I'd realized, which meant she'd been financially dependent on our marriage while working to destroy it. But my most important research was about myself. I'd been so focused on preparing for motherhood that I'd forgotten how capable I was in other areas of my life. I had an MBA from Stanford, 8 years of experience in corporate finance, and a network of professional contacts who respected my work. I'd been planning to take maternity leave and then return to work part-time, but I realized I might need to accelerate my return to ensure financial independence. I called my supervisor and scheduled a meeting for the following week, ostensibly to discuss my maternity leave plans, but actually to explore my options for returning to work sooner than originally planned. I wasn't ready to explain the situation yet, but I wanted to make sure I had choices. The hardest part of my planning was figuring out how to handle the immediate situation. Michael and Madison didn't know I'd discovered their affair, which gave me a temporary advantage. I could continue gathering evidence, could make my legal and financial preparations without them trying to hide assets or influence the narrative. But living with the knowledge while pretending everything was normal was emotionally exhausting. Every conversation with Michael felt like a performance. Every interaction with Madison felt like an interrogation. I had to smile and nod when Madison called to check on me, had to thank her for her support while knowing she was planning to steal my husband and abandon me with a newborn. I decided to use their deception against them. If they wanted to keep pretending everything was normal, I would let them. I would continue playing the role of the grateful, trusting wife and sister while I built my case and planned my strategy. They taught me how to be duplicitous now. I was going to use that education to protect myself and my daughter. I started carrying a small digital recorder in my purse, hoping to capture conversations that might be useful later. I began asking seemingly innocent questions about their schedules, their plans, their thoughts about the future. I documented every lie, every inconsistency, every moment when their stories didn't align with the evidence I'd found. Most importantly, I started building a support network that didn't include Michael or Madison. I reached out to college friends I'd lost touch with, professional contacts who might become allies, family members on my father's side who had always been more supportive than my mother's family. I was creating a foundation for the new life I was going to have to build. The legal consultation I scheduled for Monday was with Rebecca Chen, a divorce attorney who came highly recommended for her work with high-asset cases involving infidelity. Her assistant had been discreet when I'd called, understanding that I needed confidentiality while I explored my options. I spent the weekend preparing for that meeting, organizing all the evidence I'd gathered and preparing a timeline of events. I wanted to walk into that office with a clear picture of my situation and specific questions about my rights and options, but I also spent time preparing emotionally for what was coming. I was about to blow up my life to confront two people I trusted completely to become a single mother in the middle of the most challenging time in my life. The thought was terrifying, but it was also liberating. For months, I'd felt like I was losing control of my own life, like pregnancy and impending motherhood were stripping away my independence and identity. Now, I realized that Michael and Madison had been the ones controlling my life, manipulating my choices, and defining my reality. Taking that control back was going to be painful, but it was also going to be empowering. I was going to stop being the victim in my own story and start being the protagonist. I was going to stop letting other people define my worth and start defining it myself, that my daughter deserved a mother who fought for her, who stood up for herself, who modeled strength and independence. She deserved to grow up knowing that when life knocked you down, you got back up swinging. She deserved better than the weak, grateful, trusting woman I'd been, and I was going to make sure she got it. By Monday morning, I had transformed from a devastated pregnant woman into something much more dangerous, a prepared one. My meeting with Rebecca Chen had been enlightening and empowering. She'd reviewed my evidence with the clinical eye of someone who'd seen this kind of betrayal before, and her assessment had been clear. I had a strong case for both divorce and a favorable custody arrangement. The financial evidence alone is damning, she told me, spreading the bank statements and receipts across her conference table. Using marital assets to fund an extramarital affair is something judges take very seriously. And the systematic nature of the deception you've documented suggests this wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was calculated fraud. She'd explained my rights regarding our shared assets, our house, our retirement accounts. She'd outlined what I could expect in terms of spousal support and child support. Most importantly, she'd assured me that Michael's affair wouldn't prevent him from having a relationship with our daughter, but it would significantly impact how custody and financial arrangements were determined. The key, she'd said, is gathering as much evidence as possible before you confront them. Once they know you're aware of the affair, they'll start covering their tracks. Right now, you have the advantage of their complacency. So I'd spent the week playing the perfect wife and grateful sister while secretly building my case. I'd started wearing the small recording device Rebecca had recommended, hoping to capture admissions or inconsistencies that could be useful later. I continued documenting their lies, their schedules, their suspicious behavior. The breakthrough had come on Thursday. Madison had called while Michael was in the shower, ostensibly to check on how I was feeling, but really to coordinate something with him. I'd answered his phone accidentally, thinking it was mine, and heard her say, "Is she suspicious about anything? You seemed tense when I was there yesterday." I'd quickly hung up and placed the phone back where I'd found it, but the slip had confirmed what I already knew. They were actively discussing how to manage me, how to keep me in the dark while they planned their future together. That night, I tested my recording device by asking Michael about his work schedule for the following week. His answer had been completely fabricated, claiming he had client meetings on days when I knew from his calendar he was completely free. The lies came so easily to him now that I wondered if he'd been lying to me about other things throughout our entire marriage. Madison had been equally deceptive when I've asked about her weekend plans. She claimed she was driving to Colorado Springs to visit a college friend, but her social media posts from the previous weekend at the same hotel where Michael had supposedly been at a conference suggested they were planning another getaway. Together. By Friday, I felt ready to spring my trap. I needed them to reveal themselves more completely, to provide me with the kind of evidence that would be undeniable in court. Rebecca had advised me to try to get them to admit the affair on recording, or at least to catch them in lies that would support my case. I planned it carefully. Michael had told me he was working late on Friday night, which almost certainly meant he was seeing Madison. Madison had told me she was having dinner with girlfriends, which almost certainly meant she was seeing Michael. I decided to use their lies against them. I called Madison around 7 p.m. when I knew they were likely together and put her on speakerphone while I recorded the conversation. "Hey, how's dinner with the girls?" I asked innocently. There was a pause, longer than there should have been, and I could hear restaurant noise in the background that didn't sound like the casual place she'd claimed to be going. "Oh, it's great," she said, but her voice sounded strained. "Just catching up, you know. How are you feeling? Any contractions or anything unusual?" The question struck me as odd. Madison had been asking about contractions and early labor signs frequently lately, as if she was hoping the baby would come soon. I wondered if they were waiting for me to give birth so they could move forward with their plans while I was distracted and vulnerable. "I'm fine," I said. "Just missing Michael. He's working so late these days. Sometimes I feel like I barely see him anymore." Another pause. "Well, you know how busy work gets." "I'm sure he's just trying to get everything settled before the baby comes. You're probably right. Hey, what restaurant are you at?" "It sounds really nice." I heard her cover the phone and whisper something to someone, then come back on the line. "Oh, we're at that little place downtown, you know, the one near my apartment." It was a vague answer, clearly made up on the spot. I knew she was lying, but more importantly, I had her lie recorded. "Well, have fun. Tell the girls I said hi." "I will. Take care of yourself, Sarah, and call me if you need anything, okay? Anything at all." The concern in her voice sounded so genuine that for a moment, I almost forgot she was the one planning to destroy my life. She was still playing the role of the caring sister, even while she was out with my husband, even while she was lying directly to my face. After I hung up, I immediately called Michael's office line. If he was really working late, he would answer. If he was with Madison, it would go to voicemail dot, voicemail dot. I had them. They were together, they were lying about it, and I had proof. But I needed more than just this one evening. I needed a pattern, a series of lies and deceptions that would paint a clear picture of their systematic betrayal. I spent the rest of the weekend planning my final confrontation. I wasn't going to catch them in the act. That was too risky for someone in my condition, and I didn't need the visual trauma of seeing them together. Instead, I was going to present them with evidence they couldn't deny, lies they couldn't explain away, proof that their carefully constructed deception had been discovered. But first, I needed to make one more recording, one final piece of evidence that would seal their fate. I was going to ask each of them separately about their relationship with each other. I was going to give them the opportunity to tell me the truth, to confess what they'd been doing, to show some remorse for what they'd put me through. And when they inevitably lied to me again, I was going to have proof of their continued deception, evidence that they were committed to their betrayal. Even when given the chance to come clean, the confrontation was going to happen soon. I was 36 weeks pregnant, which meant my daughter could arrive at any time. I needed to resolve this situation before I went into labor, before I was in the hospital and vulnerable, before they could use my physical condition against me. It was time to stop being the victim and start being the woman who fought back. I chose Sunday evening for the confrontation with Michael. Madison was supposedly at her book club, which I now knew meant she was probably available to take his panicked phone calls when everything fell apart. I wanted him to feel isolated, to realize that his carefully constructed support system was about to crumble. I waited until after dinner. When Michael was settled in the living room with his laptop, presumably working but probably texting Madison, I'd spent the day in a strange state of calm, as if the decision to finally act had lifted a weight I'd been carrying for weeks. "Michael," I said, sitting down across from him with my recording device hidden in my sweater pocket. "I need to talk to you about something important." He looked up from his screen with that slightly annoyed expression he'd been wearing more often lately, as if my need for conversation was an interruption to his real life. "What's up? Is everything okay with the baby?" "The baby's fine," I said, "but our marriage isn't." The change in his expression was immediate, a flash of panic quickly covered by practiced concern. He closed his laptop and gave me his full attention. but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the armrests of his chair. What do you mean? Sarah, you're scaring me. Is this about the pregnancy hormones? I know you've been emotional lately. Don't, I interrupted. Don't you dare try to blame this on pregnancy hormones. I found the folder, Michael. I know about Madison. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched his face cycle through emotions, shock, fear, calculation, and finally, a kind of resigned defiance. When he spoke again, his voice was different, colder. I don't know what you think. But I found everything. I pulled out my phone and showed him photos of the bank statements, the hotel receipts, the text messages. 6 months of evidence, Michael. 6 months of you using our money to romance my sister while I was carrying your child. He stared at the photos for a long moment, and I could see him trying to figure out how much I knew, how much I could prove. The man who'd held my hand during ultrasounds was gone, replaced by someone calculating and defensive. It's not what you think, he said finally. Then explain it to me. Explain the hotel receipts. Explain the jewelry purchases. Explain the secret credit cards and the savings account I never knew about. Sarah, you have to understand. No, you have to understand. You have to understand that I'm not the naive, trusting woman you thought you married. You have to understand that I've been documenting every lie you've told me for the past 2 weeks. You have to understand that I know exactly what you and Madison have been planning. His face hardened. You don't know anything about what Madison and I have. There it is, I said. Finally, some honesty. So you admit you have something with Madison? He realized his mistake immediately, but it was too late. The admission was out, recorded, undeniable. Sarah, let me explain. 6 months, I said. 6 months of lying to my face. 6 months of using our money to court my sister. 6 months of making me feel grateful for her support while she was stealing my husband. 6 months of planning your future together while I planned our daughter's nursery. It wasn't supposed to happen, he said, and for the first time, he sounded genuinely remorseful. Madison was just being supportive during your difficult pregnancy. And we started talking, and you decided I was too sick, too needy, too difficult to be married to anymore. That's not fair. You changed during this pregnancy, Sarah. You became someone I didn't recognize. Madison helped me understand that it wasn't your fault, that pregnancy affects different women differently. But she convinced you that you deserve better. She didn't convince me of anything. She just listened when you were too tired or sick to pay attention to what I was going through. The gaslighting was breathtaking. Even now, caught red-handed, he was trying to make this my fault, trying to position himself as the victim of my pregnancy symptoms and Madison as the understanding woman who'd rescued him from his difficult wife. What were you planning to do after the baby was born? I asked. How were you going to handle that transition? He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him debating how much truth he could afford to tell me. We were going to wait, he said finally. Let you adjust to being a mother, get settled into a routine. Madison thought it would be easier on everyone, especially the baby, if we didn't disrupt everything immediately. How thoughtful of Madison to plan my postpartum period for me. Sarah, please. I know this is hard, but Madison and we didn't plan this. It just happened. And we were trying to handle it in the most respectful way possible. Respectful. I stood up, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. You think stealing my husband and planning to abandon me with a newborn is respectful? You think using our money to finance your affair is respectful? You think turning my sister against me during the most vulnerable time in my life is respectful? Keep your voice down. You're going to upset yourself, and that's not good for the baby. Don't you dare tell me what's good for my baby. You lost the right to have opinions about my pregnancy when you started sleeping with my sister. He stood up too, and for a moment, I saw something dangerous in his expression. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Sarah. this emotional volatility, this inability to have a rational conversation. Madison doesn't react like this. Madison doesn't react like this because Madison isn't 8 months pregnant with your child while discovering that her husband is a lying, cheating fraud. I'm not a fraud. I fell in love with someone else. It happens. People grow apart, they change, they find that they're not compatible anymore. That doesn't make me a villain. No. But lying about it for 6 months does. Stealing our money to finance it does. Convincing my sister to betray me does. Those things make you a villain, Michael. He sat back down, suddenly looking exhausted. So what happens now? What do you want from me? I want you to leave tonight. I want you to go to Madison's apartment or hotel or wherever you want to. Go, but I want you out of this house. Sarah, you can't just kick me out. This is my house too. And you're pregnant, you shouldn't be alone. I've been alone for 6 months. I just didn't know it. Be reasonable. We need to think about the baby, about how to handle this situation like adults. I am being reasonable. I'm being more reasonable than you deserve. I could have confronted you in public, could have exposed you to your colleagues, could have made this much more difficult for you than I'm making it. What about Madison? Are you planning to destroy her life too? The question revealed so much about where his loyalties lay, about who he was really concerned about protecting. Madison destroyed her own life when she decided to sleep with her. Pregnant sister's husband, just like you destroyed yours. I'm not doing anything except refusing to pretend this didn't happen. He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him processing the reality of his situation. The comfortable deception was over. The careful planning had been discovered. The future he'd been building with Madison was about to become much more complicated. I'll pack a bag, he said finally. But we need to talk about how to handle the practical things. The house, the finances, the baby. We'll handle those things through lawyers. Sarah, please. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I'm not making this hard, Michael. You made this hard when you decided to have an affair with my sister. I'm just refusing to make it easy for you. Michael left that night with 2 suitcases and a defeated expression. I watched him load his car from the bedroom window, feeling a mixture of relief and terror. The man I'd planned to raise a child with was driving away to start a new life with. My sister and I was about to become a single mother in a matter of weeks. But first, I had to deal with Madison. I waited until Tuesday to call her, giving Michael time to decide whether he was going to warn her about our conversation. The phone records I'd been monitoring suggested he hadn't. There were no calls between them since Sunday night, which meant he was probably as confused and panicked as I'd hoped he would be. Sarah. Madison's voice was bright and cheerful when she answered. How are you feeling? Any signs that our little princess is ready to make her appearance? The performance was flawless, as always. If I hadn't known better, I would have believed she was genuinely concerned about my well-being and excited about her niece's arrival. Actually, that's why I'm calling, I said. I wanted to talk to you about something important. Could you come over this afternoon? Of course. Is everything okay? You sound a little stressed. Everything's fine. I just need to discuss some things about the baby, about the future, family things. I'll be right over. Do you need me to bring anything? Food? Or just yourself? We need to have a sister-to-sister conversation. She arrived within an hour, carrying a bag from my favorite bakery and wearing the concerned expression she'd perfected over the past few months. She looked beautiful, as always, but I noticed she was wearing the necklace Michael had bought her, a bold choice that suggested either incredible arrogance or complete confidence that I would never discover the truth. You look tired, she said, settling into the chair where Michael had been sitting 2 nights earlier. Are you getting enough rest? I know these last few weeks can be really difficult. I've been having trouble sleeping, I said, which was true. I keep thinking about the future, about what's going to happen after the baby comes. That's completely normal. Every new mother goes through that, but you're going to be amazing, Sarah. You're going to be the kind of mother our daughter will be proud of. The way she said our daughter made my skin crawl, as if she was already positioning herself as a co-parent, as someone who would be intimately involved in raising my child. Madison, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course, you can ask me anything. I turned on the recording device in my pocket and looked directly at her. Are you having an affair with Michael? The change in her expression was subtle but unmistakable. The warm, concerned smile faltered for just a moment before she managed to look shocked and hurt. Sarah, how could you even ask me something like that? Why would you think? Because I found evidence. Bank statements, hotel receipts, text messages. I know about the jewelry, the weekend getaways, the secret credit cards. I know about everything, Madison. She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her calculating how much I actually knew versus how much I was guessing. When she spoke again, her voice was different, less warm, more careful. I think you're misunderstanding some things. Michael and I have talked, yes, about your pregnancy and how to support you through this difficult time. But if you're interpreting that as something inappropriate, I'm interpreting hotel receipts and jewelry purchases as something inappropriate. I'm interpreting 6 months of lies and secret meetings as something inappropriate. I'm interpreting text messages saying I can't stop thinking about you as something inappropriate. Her mask slipped further. Sarah, you're clearly upset, and I understand why. Pregnancy can make you paranoid, can make you see things that aren't there. Don't you dare try to gaslight me. I'm not paranoid, and I'm not imagining things. I have proof, Madison. Documented, undeniable proof. She stood up and began pacing, her carefully controlled facade finally cracking. Okay, fine. Maybe Michael and I have grown closer over the past few months. Maybe we've developed feelings for each other. But it's not what you think. Then tell me what it is. It's complicated, Sarah. Your pregnancy has been really hard on Michael. He's been scared and overwhelmed, and he needed someone to talk to, someone to sleep with, someone who understood what he was going through. You've been so focused on the baby, so consumed with your own symptoms and needs, that you haven't paid attention to how this has affected him. The victim blaming was starting just as it had with Michael. Somehow my difficult pregnancy had justified their affair. Somehow my focus on growing a human being had made me a neglectful wife who deserved to be betrayed. So you decided to help him by sleeping with him. It wasn't planned, it just happened. We were both trying to support you, and we ended up supporting each other, and things developed between us that neither of us expected. For 6 months? Yes, for 6 months. And it's been torture, Sarah. Do you think we wanted this to happen? Do you think we enjoyed lying to you? Actually, yes. I think you enjoyed it very much. I think you enjoyed the secrecy, the planning, the feeling of being smarter than me. I think you enjoyed having something I didn't know about. That's not true. Then why didn't you tell me? If this was just an unexpected emotional connection that got out of hand, why didn't you come to me immediately and confess what was happening? She was quiet, caught in the logic of her own lies. Because you knew I would fight for my marriage. Because you knew I would try to work things out with Michael. Because you wanted him for yourself, and telling me would have ruined your chances. You don't understand what Michael and I have. I understand that what you have was built on lies and betrayal. I understand that it required destroying my trust and my marriage. I understand that you were willing to leave me to raise his child alone so you could have him for yourself. We never wanted to hurt you. We were trying to find a way to handle this that would be least painful for everyone. By planning to wait until after I gave birth to leave me, by letting me struggle through new motherhood before dropping this bomb on me. How thoughtful. We thought it would be easier For who? Easier for you and Michael to build your relationship while I was distracted with a newborn? Easier for you to position yourself as the supportive aunt who was helping with the baby? Easier for you to gradually take over my life while I was too exhausted to fight back? She stopped pacing and looked at me with something that might have been respect. You're not as naive as I thought you were. No, I'm not. And that's going to be a problem for you. What do you mean? I mean, I'm not going to quietly disappear so you and Michael can live happily ever after. I mean, I'm going to fight for what's mine, my house, my child's future. I mean, your fairy tale ending is about to become a very public nightmare. Sarah, please. Think about what you're doing. Think about the baby, about how this will affect her. I am thinking about the baby. I'm thinking about what kind of world I want her to grow up in. And I've decided I want her to grow up knowing that when someone betrays you, you fight back. I want her to know that when someone tries to steal your life, you don't let them keep it. Madison sat back down, her face pale. What do you want from me? I want you to stay away from Michael. I want you to stay away from me. I want you to stay away from my daughter when she's born. I want you out of our lives completely. You can't do that. We're family. We were family. Before you decided that sleeping with my husband was more important than being my sister, now we're just two women who happen to share some DNA. Sarah, please. I know you're angry, but I'm not angry. Madison, I'm done. Done with your lies, done with your manipulation, done with pretending that you're anything other than the woman who destroyed my marriage for her own selfish purposes. She looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her processing the reality of her situation. The sister she'd been deceiving was gone, replaced by someone who knew exactly who she was and what she'd done. Michael loves me, she said finally. Whatever you do, whatever you say, that won't change. Maybe, but he loved me too once, and look how that turned out for me. Good luck building a life with someone you know is capable of lying for 6 months without blinking. Good luck trusting someone who's willing to betray the mother of his child. Good luck, Madison. You're going to need it. The hardest part about destroying my marriage wasn't losing Michael. It was losing the illusion of family. I built around our life together. Within hours of Madison leaving my house, my phone started buzzing with messages from relatives who'd been dragged into the drama. My mother called first, her voice strained and confused. Sarah, Madison just called me crying. She said you accused her of terrible things, that you're upset about her friendship with Michael. Honey, I think the pregnancy stress might be affecting your judgment. Mom, stop. I cut her off before she could finish the well-meaning but devastating sentence. Madison and Michael have been having an affair for 6 months. I have proof. This isn't pregnancy paranoia or stress, this is reality. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. That can't be true, she said finally. Madison would never, Madison would absolutely. And she did. For 6 months while I was pregnant with his child, while she was pretending to support me through morning sickness and bed rest and every other complication I had. Sarah, you have to be careful about making accusations like this. Family relationships are complicated and sometimes, Mom, whose side are you on? I'm not on anyone's side. I'm trying to understand what's happening to my family, but I could hear it in her voice, the doubt. The unwillingness to believe that Madison could be capable of such betrayal. Madison had always been the charming daughter, the one who called regularly and remembered birthdays and made my mother feel appreciated. I had been the responsible daughter, the one who sent money when Dad was unemployed and handled logistics when Mom was overwhelmed. But I had never been the favorite. My father's reaction was different but equally painful. When I called him at work and explained the situation, he was quiet for a long moment before responding. What do you need from me? He asked, and the simple question made me start crying. I need you to believe me. I need you to understand that I'm not making this up or exaggerating because of pregnancy hormones. I believe you, and I'm sorry this happened to you. Madison has been calling everyone, hasn't she? Trying to control the narrative. She called your mother and your aunt. She's saying you're having some kind of breakdown, that you're seeing things that aren't there. Of course she is. That's what people do when they get caught. They try to make the person who caught them look crazy. What can I do to help? I don't know yet. Right now, I just need to know that someone in this family believes me and supports me. You have that. Whatever you need, whenever you need it. But my father was one voice against a growing chorus of doubt. Madison had moved quickly to contact our extended family, and her version of events was spreading faster than mine. She was positioning herself as the concerned sister worried about my mental health, the supportive family member being unfairly attacked by a hormonal pregnant woman. Our family group chat, which had been full of excited messages about the babies. Impending arrival had become a battlefield of competing narratives. Madison's allies, mostly family members, who'd always been charmed by her personality, were expressing concern about my accusations and suggesting I needed professional help to deal with pregnancy stress. My cousin Jennifer, who'd always been more like a sister to me than Madison had, sent me a private message. I believe you. Madison's story doesn't add up, and she's trying too hard to convince everyone you're unstable. What do you need? But Jennifer was in the minority. Most of our family was choosing to believe Madison's version of events, either because they genuinely thought she was incapable of such behavior, or because it was easier than accepting that. Their family was falling apart. The most devastating message came from my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister who had helped raise us after our grandmother died. Sarah, I love you, but I think you need to seriously consider that pregnancy can affect your perception of reality. Madison is heartbroken that you would accuse her of something so awful. Maybe you should talk to a therapist before you destroy relationships that can't be repaired. I realized that Madison's strategy was working perfectly. She'd gotten ahead of the story, positioned herself as the victim, and used my pregnancy as an explanation for my irrational behavior. By the time I tried to present evidence or defend myself, the family narrative was already established. Sarah was having a breakdown, and Madison was the innocent sister being unfairly attacked. The worst part was how isolated it made me feel, just when I needed my family's support most, just when I was facing the prospect of single motherhood and a contentious divorce. Half of them thought I was mentally unstable, and the other half were trying to stay neutral in a situation where neutrality felt like abandonment. Michael, meanwhile, had apparently been conducting his own damage control campaign. His family had always liked me, but they were getting a very different version of events. According to his sister Amy, who called me supposedly to check on the baby, Michael was going through a difficult time and had found support with Madison during my challenging pregnancy. I'm not taking sides, Amy said, but everything about her tone suggested she already had. I just think it's important that everyone focuses on what's best for the baby right now. What's best for the baby is having parents who aren't liars and cheaters, I said. Sarah, I understand you're upset, but what? But I should accept my husband's affair because I was difficult to live with while I was growing his child. But I should be grateful that my sister was there to comfort him while I was throwing up and dealing with high blood pressure. That's not what I meant. Yes, it is. That's exactly what you meant. Everyone wants me to be reasonable, to be understanding, to consider everyone else's feelings. But no one wants to consider mine. I hung up on her. Another bridge burned in the fire that Madison and Michael had started. The family fractures were spreading in ways I hadn't anticipated. People were choosing sides not based on right and wrong, but based on comfort and convenience. It was easier to believe that I was overreacting than to accept that. Madison and Michael had been systematically deceiving everyone for months, but the most painful realization was that this division would affect my daughter. She would grow up in a family where half the relatives thought her mother was unstable and her father and aunt were the real victims. She would hear whispered conversations about the breakdown that destroyed our family, the accusations that tore everyone apart. Madison had managed to steal not just my husband, but my family's narrative. She'd made herself the protagonist of a story where I was the villain, and too many people were willing to believe her version because it allowed them to avoid the uncomfortable truth about someone they'd loved and trusted. Realized that I wasn't just fighting for my marriage or my financial security. I was fighting for my reputation, my relationships, my daughter's understanding of what had really happened. Madison and Michael weren't just betraying me. They were rewriting history to make their betrayal look like my fault. And that, more than anything else, made me determined to fight back with everything I had. At 37 weeks pregnant, I was running out of time in more ways than one. My daughter could arrive any day, and I needed to have all my legal and financial ducks in a row before I was incapacitated by labor and recovery. The past week had been a whirlwind of meetings with lawyers, accountants, and financial advisors, all while pretending to the outside world that I was just preparing for normal new mother responsibilities. Rebecca Chun had been worth every penny of her substantial retainer. She'd reviewed all my evidence with the thoroughness of someone preparing for war, and that's exactly what she was doing. Michael's affair wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was financial fraud, and Rebecca was building a case that would protect both my immediate needs and my daughter's future security. The recordings you've made are excellent, she told me during our Tuesday morning meeting. Their admissions of the affair, combined with the financial evidence, give us a very strong position. Michael's lawyer is going to try to argue that the affair started after your marriage was already failing, but the timeline of evidence you've provided makes that impossible to prove. We'd spent hours going through the financial documents, identifying assets, debts, and income streams that would need to be divided. Michael made more money than I did, but I'd contributed significantly to our savings and had been the more careful financial planner. The house had substantial equity, our retirement accounts were well funded, and we had investments that Michael had apparently forgotten about when he'd started his secret savings account. He's going to argue that he deserves more because he's been the primary breadwinner, Rebecca warned me. But the fact that he used marital assets to fund an extramarital affair significantly weakens that position. Plus, you'll have primary custody of a newborn, which affects both support calculations and housing needs. The custody arrangement was the most important piece of the puzzle. I wanted my daughter to have a relationship with her father, but I also wanted to ensure that Madison had no legal standing in her life. Rebecca had assured me that Michael's affair wouldn't prevent him from getting joint custody, but it would likely result in a more favorable arrangement for me, especially in the first year of our daughter's life. The court will prioritize stability for a newborn, she explained. That means you'll likely get primary physical custody, with Michael having supervised visitation initially and then moving to overnight visits as the child gets older. The fact that he left the marital home voluntarily also strengthens your position. I'd been documenting everything Michael and Madison did since our confrontations, building a record of their behavior that could be useful in court. Michael had moved in with Madison immediately, which Rebecca said would help establish that their relationship was serious and ongoing rather than a momentary lapse in judgment. Madison had been posting subtle social media updates about new beginnings and finding happiness in unexpected places, which we'd screenshot as evidence of her lack of remorse. The financial preparation had been equally important. I'd opened my own bank account and had started moving money that was clearly mine, my salary, my personal savings, money from before our marriage. I'd also been careful to document every joint expense, every shared asset, every dollar that would need to be accounted for in the divorce settlement. But the most crucial preparation was emotional. I'd started seeing a therapist who specialized in divorce and family trauma, someone who could help me process what had happened while also serving as a professional witness to my mental state. Dr. Martinez had been clear from our first session that my reactions to the betrayal were completely normal and appropriate. "You're not having a breakdown," she'd told me. "You're having a normal response to an abnormal situation. The fact that you're able to plan strategically while dealing with this trauma actually demonstrates remarkable strength and resilience." I'd also been preparing practically for single motherhood. The nursery was complete, the car seat was installed, and I'd stocked up on everything I'd need for the first few months of my daughter's life. I'd arranged for my friend Jennifer to be my birth partner, since Michael would no longer be filling that role, and I'd made detailed plans for postpartum support that didn't include my sister. The hospital bag sitting by my front door felt like a symbol of my new life. Inside were clothes for me and the baby, insurance cards and legal documents, and a list of emergency contacts that no longer included Madison. I'd even packed the locket she'd given me at the baby shower, not because I wanted to wear it, but because I wanted to have it with me when I looked at my daughter for the first time, to remind myself that I was stronger than the people who tried to break me. The hardest part of the preparation had been dealing with the ongoing family drama. Madison's campaign to control the narrative had been partially successful, but some family members were starting to ask harder questions. When Madison had been unable to provide a reasonable explanation for why I would invent such a specific and elaborate story, a few relatives had begun to doubt her version of events. My cousin Jennifer had been particularly helpful, quietly, talking to other family members and pointing out inconsistencies in Madison's story. If Sarah was really having a breakdown, she'd ask them, why would she be so calm and organized about handling the legal and financial aspects? And why would Michael move out immediately if he wasn't guilty of something? But regardless of who believed what, I was preparing for a future that didn't depend on family support or approval. I was building a life for me and my daughter that would be stable and secure. Regardless of what happened with the rest of the family, the final piece of preparation was the most difficult. Emotionally preparing to see Michael at the hospital when I went into labor. Rebecca had advised me that I couldn't legally prevent him from being there for the birth, but I could control how much access he had and what role he played. I'd already informed the hospital staff that I was going through a divorce and that they should check with me before allowing anyone into my room. I'd also prepared a statement for Michael, something I could give him if he tried to apologize or explain his behavior while I was in labor. I wanted him to know that I understood what he'd done, that I held him fully responsible for the destruction of our family, and that any attempts to minimize or justify his actions would be futile. But most importantly, I prepared myself mentally for the moment when I would become a mother. My daughter was going to be born into a complicated situation, but she was also going to be born to a mother who had fought for her, who had refused to accept betrayal and abandonment, who had chosen strength over victimhood. She would never doubt that she was wanted, that she was loved, that she was worth fighting for. And someday, when she was old enough to understand what had happened, she would know that her mother had chosen her over everyone else, had rebuilt her life around protecting and providing for her daughter. The bag by the door, the legal documents, the financial preparations, they were all symbols of that choice, evidence that even in the worst circumstances, love could be stronger than betrayal, and hope could be stronger than heartbreak. Labor started at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, exactly 38 weeks into my pregnancy. I'd been having irregular contractions for hours, but when my water broke, I knew it was time. Jennifer arrived within 30 minutes of my call, calm and prepared, holding my hand through the contractions while we waited for my father to drive us to the hospital. Michael wasn't there. I'd sent him a brief text letting him know labor had started, but I'd made it clear that Jennifer would be my support person and that he should wait to hear from me before coming to the hospital. It felt strange going through labor without the man who was supposed to be my partner, but it also felt right. I didn't want the distraction of his presence, the complication of his guilt and Madison's anxiety contaminating this experience. Labor progressed quickly, more quickly than anyone had expected for a first-time mother. Dr. Patel, who had managed my entire pregnancy, was surprised by how smoothly everything went despite all the stress I'd been under for the past month. Sometimes when women are emotionally ready to move forward, their bodies cooperate, she told me between contractions. You're one of the strongest patients I've ever had. Jennifer held my hand and coached me through breathing exercises, whispering encouragement and reminding me that I was bringing my daughter into a world where she would be fiercely loved and protected. My father stayed in the waiting room, sending periodic updates to family members and fielding questions about Michael's absence that he deflected with practice skill. At 2:47 p.m. After 11 hours of labor, my daughter was born. Emma Rose Mitchell, 6 pounds, 8 ounces of perfect screaming life. The moment they placed her on my chest, still wet and warm and furious at being evicted from her comfortable home, I understood what people meant when they talked about love at first sight. She was mine, completely, utterly, irrevocably mine. And in that moment, I knew that every painful step I'd taken to get to this point had been worth it. Every confrontation, every legal meeting, every family argument, every sleepless night, all of it had been in service of protecting this tiny person who is now looking at me with dark, serious eyes. She's beautiful, Jennifer whispered, tears streaming down her face. Sarah, she's absolutely perfect. At 2:47 p.m., after 11 hours of labor, my daughter was born. Emma Rose Mitchell, 6 pounds, 8 ounces of perfect screaming life. The moment they placed her on my chest, still wet and warm and furious at being evicted from her comfortable home, I understood what people meant when they talked about love at first sight. She was mine. Completely, utterly, irrevocably mine. And in that moment, I knew that every painful step I'd taken to get to this point had been worth it. Every confrontation, every legal meeting, every family argument, every sleepless night, all of it had been in service of protecting this tiny person who is now looking at me with dark, serious eyes. She's beautiful, Jennifer whispered, tears streaming down her face. Sarah, she's absolutely perfect. Dr. Patel completed the delivery and began the routine checks, but I barely heard her instructions. I was completely absorbed in studying Emma's face, memorizing every detail, feeling the weight of her small body against mine. She had Michael's nose and what looked like my stubborn chin, but everything else was uniquely her own. Michael arrived. 20 minutes later, still wearing his work clothes and looking haggard. I texted him that Emma had been born safely, and he'd apparently dropped everything to rush to the hospital. He knocked softly on my door, and when I nodded, he entered with the cautious movements of someone who wasn't sure he was welcome. "Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "How are you? How is she?" "We're both fine," I said, not moving to hand him the baby. "She's healthy and strong." He approached the bed slowly, his eyes fixed on Emma with an expression I recognized from our ultrasound appointments, wonder mixed with terror. When he was close enough to see her clearly, he started crying. "She's so small," he whispered. "She's so perfect." "Yes, she is. May I hold her?" I hesitated for a moment, then carefully transferred Emma to his arms. Whatever else Michael had done, he was her father, and she deserved to know him. But I also made sure Jennifer was there to witness the interaction, documenting this moment for potential future legal proceedings. Michael held Emma with the careful reverence of someone Handling something infinitely precious and breakable. She opened her eyes and looked at him with that serious, ancient expression that newborns have, and his tears intensified. "I'm so sorry," he said, though I wasn't sure if he was talking to me or to her. "I'm so sorry about everything." "She doesn't need your apologies," I said quietly. "She needs your consistency. She needs you to be the father she deserves, regardless of what happens between us. I want to be a good father to her. Then be one. But being her father doesn't give you any rights regarding me. And it doesn't give Madison any rights regarding either of us." The mention of Madison's name made him flinch. "Sarah, about Madison, not now. Not here. This is about Emma, not about your choices." He held her for another few minutes, whispering things I couldn't hear, making promises I hoped he would keep. When he reluctantly handed her back to me, his face was streaked with tears and something that might have been regret. "I made terrible choices," he said. "I hurt you in ways that can't be forgiven. But I want you to know that I never stopped loving her. Even when I was making those choices, I was excited about being her father. Then prove it. Be present, be reliable, be honest, be everything you weren't as a husband. I will. I promise I will." After Michael left, promising to return, the next day during visiting hours, Madison appeared at my door. I wasn't surprised. I'd been expecting her to try to see Emma, to establish herself as the loving aunt despite everything that had happened. "Sarah," she said, hovering in the doorway. "Congratulations, she's beautiful. Thank you." "May I come in? I brought a gift." "No." The single word hung in the air between us. Madison had clearly expected resistance, but she'd also expected to be able to charm her way past it, to use the emotions of the moment to reestablish her place in my life. "Sarah, please. I know things are complicated right now, but she's my niece. I love her already. You gave up the right to love her when you decided to sleep with her father. That's not fair. What happened between Michael and me has nothing to do with my relationship with Emma. It has everything to do with it. You can't betray someone and then expect to maintain access to their child. You can't destroy a family and then want to be part of what's left. I'm still your sister." "No, you're not. You're the woman who had an affair with my husband. That's the only relationship we have now." Madison tried several more approaches: guilt, manipulation, appeals to family loyalty, but I remained firm. Jennifer stood beside my bed like a guardian, making it clear that Madison's presence was unwelcome and temporary. Finally, Madison left, but not before making one last attempt to establish her position. "Michael and I are going to be together, Sarah. We're going to be a family. It would be better for Emma if we could all find a way to coexist peacefully." "Emma and I are a family," I said. "You and Michael are just two people who betrayed the families you had before. Don't confuse those things." After she left, I looked down at Emma, who had slept through the entire confrontation. She was so peaceful, so innocent of the chaos that had surrounded her birth. I made her a silent promise. She would grow up knowing the truth about what had happened, but she would never doubt that she was loved, wanted, and protected. The birth certificate I filled out that evening listed only my name as her emergency contact, only my address as her home. Michael would have legal rights as her father, but Emma's primary allegiance would always be to me, to the parent who had chosen her over everyone else, who had fought for her before she was even born. That night, holding Emma in the dim hospital room while she slept, I realized that the woman who had discovered her husband's affair 6 weeks ago was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who understood that love sometimes required fighting, that family was something you built rather than something you inherited, that the most important relationships were the ones you chose to protect. No matter what it cost you, Emma stirred in my arms, making the small sounds newborns make when they're dreaming. I wondered what she was dreaming about, what her unconscious mind was processing from her first day in the world. I hoped she was, dreaming about love, about safety, about the future we were going to build together, just the two of us, for as long as she needed it to be that way. The divorce proceedings moved faster than I'd expected, helped along by Michael's apparent eagerness to finalize things and start his new life with Madison. 6 months after Emma's birth, we were sitting in a conference room with our lawyers, signing documents that officially ended our marriage and established the framework for our co-parenting relationship. Rebecca had negotiated brilliantly. The evidence of Michael's affair, combined with his use of marital assets to fund it, had resulted in a settlement that was far more favorable than I'd initially hoped. I got the house, 70% of our shared assets, and substantial monthly child support that would ensure Emma's financial security. Michael's retirement account took a significant hit, and his secret savings account, the one he'd built for his future with Madison, was split equally between us as part of the marital assets division. Your ex-husband's lawyer advised him to settle rather than go to trial, Rebecca explained after Michael and his attorney had left. The evidence you gathered was so comprehensive that they knew they couldn't win a contested case. Plus, Michael's employer had started asking questions about his expense account irregularities, so he wanted to avoid any additional scrutiny. The professional consequences for Michael had been swift and severe. His affair with Madison had become an open secret at his firm after several colleagues had spotted them together at restaurants and hotels. When the senior partners learned that he'd been using company resources to facilitate personal relationships, he'd been quietly asked to resign. He'd found another position, but at a significant pay cut that would affect his future earning potential. Madison's business had suffered even more dramatic consequences. The marketing industry in Denver was smaller than she'd realized, and word of her affair with her pregnant sister's husband had spread through professional networks with devastating speed. Several clients had terminated their contracts, citing concerns about professional judgment and ethical considerations. She'd been forced to close her consulting practice and take a job at a larger firm for a fraction of what she'd been earning as an independent contractor. But the most satisfying consequence had been the gradual shift in family opinion, as the truth about Madison and Michael's behavior became undeniable. And as I remained calm and focused on building a stable life for Emma, family members who had initially doubted my story began to reconsider their positions. The turning point had come when Madison had posted a photo on social media of herself and Michael at a romantic dinner, just 3 weeks after Emma was born. The timing was so tone-deaf, so callous, that even her most loyal supporters had been forced to acknowledge that something was seriously wrong with her judgment and priorities. My Aunt Carol, who had initially suggested I was having a breakdown, called to apologize 6 months after Emma's birth. "I've been watching how you've handled this situation," she said, "and I realize I was wrong to doubt you. The way you've focused on Emma's needs, the way you've built a stable life for her, that's not the behavior of someone who was unstable. That's the behavior of someone who was betrayed and chose to fight back intelligently." Even my mother had come around, though her support came with the grudging acknowledgement that she'd misjudged the situation. "Madison has always been able to charm people," she admitted during one of her visits to see Emma. "I wanted to believe her version because it was easier than accepting that she could do something so cruel. But watching how she's acted since the divorce, the social media posts, the apparent lack of remorse, I can't pretend anymore that she's the victim here." The custody arrangement had worked out better than I'd hoped. Michael had initially pushed for 50-50 custody, but Emma's needs as a nursing infant had made that impractical. By the time she was old enough for overnight visits, Michael's enthusiasm for hands-on parenting had waned considerably. His weekends with Emma were often shortened or rescheduled due to his social plans with Madison, and he'd never taken advantage of his midweek visitation opportunities. Madison's attempts to establish herself as a stepmother figure had been uniformly unsuccessful. Emma, who had always been an intuitive child, seemed to sense the tension around Madison and would become fussy and clingy whenever she was present. After several disastrous visits where Emma had cried inconsolably in Madison's presence, Michael had stopped bringing her to their shared activities. The most vindictive part of me took satisfaction in watching their relationship crumble under the weight of real-world pressures. Building a relationship on the excitement of secret meetings and stolen moments was very different from building a life together while dealing with financial stress, professional consequences, and the daily reality of co-parenting with the woman they'd betrayed. Michael's child support payments were consistently late. His visits with Emma became increasingly sporadic, and his promises to be a devoted father gradually gave way to the reality that he was better at making commitments than keeping them. Madison's resentment about the financial impact of the divorce on their lifestyle was barely concealed, and her social media posts had shifted from celebration to complaints about unfair legal systems and vindictive ex-wives. But the most meaningful consequence was the one I created for myself, a new life built entirely on my own terms. I'd returned to work when Emma was 4 months old, taking a position with a different company that offered better work-life balance and the opportunity for advancement. My new colleagues knew me as Sarah Mitchell, the competent single mother who'd negotiated a flexible schedule and delivered excellent results. I'd built a network of friends who had never known me as Michael's wife or Madison's sister. They knew me as Emma's mother, as a woman who'd made difficult choices and built a stable, happy life for herself and her daughter. They didn't know the details of my divorce, and they didn't need to. They judged me based on who I was now, not who I'd been when I was married to a man who didn't deserve me. The house had been transformed from a place of betrayal into a home filled with Emma's laughter, my friends' conversations, and the quiet satisfaction of a life lived according to my own values. I'd redecorated Emma's nursery, created a home office where I could work remotely, and planted a garden where Emma could play as she got older. Financial independence had been the key to everything else. The divorce settlement, combined with my salary and careful budgeting, meant that I didn't need Michael's support or approval for any decisions about Emma's life or my own. I could choose her daycare, her activities, her healthcare providers, her education, without having to negotiate with someone who had proven himself unreliable and self-serving. The legal documentation that established these arrangements sat in a file cabinet in my home office next to Emma's birth certificate, her social security card, and her passport application. These papers represented more than just a divorce settlement. They represented my independence, my security, and my daughter's future. But the most important document was the letter I'd written to Emma for her to read when she was older, explaining what had happened during her first year of life and why our family looked the way it did. I'd been honest about her father's choices, fair about his attempts to maintain a relationship with her, and clear about my own decisions to prioritize her well-being over family harmony. Your father is not a bad man, I'd written, but he made bad choices that hurt people who loved him. Your Aunt Madison chose to participate in those bad choices, which means she cannot be part of our daily life. Part of our daily life. But you are not responsible for any of those decisions, and you are not diminished by them. You are loved, you are wanted, and you are surrounded by people who will always put your needs first. The letter was my promise to her that she would grow up knowing the truth, but also knowing that the truth didn't define her worth or limit her possibilities. She would understand that sometimes people you trust will disappoint you, but that disappointment doesn't mean you stop trusting altogether. She would learn that families come in many forms, and the most important family is the one that shows up for you consistently, day after day, regardless of what it cost them. Justice, I learned, wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about consequences that matched choices, about building a life that reflected your values, about protecting the people who depended on you regardless of what other people thought you should do. Michael and Madison had gotten exactly what they'd asked for each other, and a life built on the foundation of betraying other people. The fact that this foundation was proving unstable wasn't my responsibility to fix or my satisfaction to savor. My responsibility was to Emma, to myself, and to the future we were building together. 2 years have passed since that terrible day when I found Michael's folder of betrayal, and Emma is now a toddler who fills our home with laughter, chaos, and the kind of joy I never knew was possible. She's walking, talking in short sentences, and has developed a stubborn independence that reminds me daily of my own strength. This morning, I'm sitting in our backyard garden, watching Emma chase butterflies while I drink my coffee and prepare for another day at the marketing firm where I now serve as senior director. The promotion came 6 months ago, along with a salary increase that has made us not just financially secure, but actually comfortable. The little girl who started life in the midst of family destruction is now thriving in a home built on honesty, stability, and unconditional love. The professional photograph on my desk, the one I'd had taken when Emma turned 2, shows both of us smiling genuinely, confidently, with the kind of peace that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're fighting for. It's the artifact that represents our new beginning, the visual proof that we survived the worst thing that had ever happened to us and came out stronger on the other side. Michael sees Emma every other weekend now, though his visits have become increasingly predictable and brief. He picks her up Saturday morning, takes her to the zoo or a children's museum, and returns her Sunday evening with stories about their activities and a slightly relieved expression that suggests he's fulfilled his parental obligations for another 2 weeks. Emma enjoys these visits but doesn't seem to miss him when he's gone, which tells me everything I need to know about the quality of their relationship. Madison is no longer part of our lives, which is exactly what I'd hoped for and worked toward. She and Michael's relationship lasted 18 months before crumbling under the weight of financial stress, professional consequences, and the reality that relationships built on betrayal rarely survive the transition to ordinary life. Michael mentioned during one custody exchange that Madison had moved to Phoenix for a new job, starting over in a city where no one knew her story. I felt no satisfaction at this news, just relief that the chapter of our lives that included her was finally, definitively closed. The family relationships that had been fractured by the divorce have mostly healed, though in configurations I never could have predicted. My father remains my strongest supporter, visiting every few weeks and serving as Emma's most devoted grandfather. My mother's relationship with me is cordial but cautious. She's never quite forgiven herself for initially doubting my story, and I've never quite forgiven her for needing proof of my sister's cruelty before she would believe me. I've built a new family of choice around Emma and me. Jennifer remains my closest friend and Emma's honorary aunt. My colleagues have become genuine friends who include us in their family gatherings and celebrations. My neighbors have become the kind of community I never had when I was married, people who look out for each other's children, who share resources and support, who celebrate successes and help weather difficulties. Emma's daycare provider, Mrs. Rodriguez, has become something like a grandmother figure, offering advice about parenting and life with the wisdom of someone who's raised 5 children of her own. The other single mothers in Emma's playgroup have become my informal support network, women who understand the challenges and rewards of building a life centered on your child's needs. Rather than social expectations, dating has been a non-issue for the past 2 years, partly because I've been focused on establishing our new life, and partly because I'm not sure I'm ready to trust someone with access to the happiness Emma and I have built. But I'm not close to the possibility. I just know that any relationship I consider in the future we'll have to enhance what we already have rather than require us to compromise our security or peace. Dr. Martinez, the therapist who helped me through the immediate aftermath of the divorce, recently told me that I've become one of her success stories, someone who transformed trauma into strength, who chose growth over bitterness, who built something beautiful from the wreckage of betrayal. I still see her occasionally, not because I need help processing what happened, but because I value her perspective on the choices I'm making as Emma gets older. The house that was once the scene of my marriage's destruction has been transformed into something entirely new. Emma's artwork covers the refrigerator, her toys are scattered throughout the living room, and her laughter echoes through rooms that used to feel heavy with secrets and lies. I've painted every wall, replaced most of the furniture, and created spaces that reflect our life together rather than the life I had before. The nursery where I used to dream about our family's future is now Emma's big girl room, decorated with rainbows and books and the confident chaos of a child who knows she's loved. The home office where I discovered Michael's betrayal is now my workspace, where I make decisions about marketing campaigns and client relationships while Emma naps or plays nearby. But the most significant change is in me. The woman who used to seek approval and validation from others has been replaced by someone who knows her own worth and doesn't need external confirmation to feel valuable. The woman who used to be grateful for scraps of attention and support has learned to expect consistency and respect from the people in her life. Emma will grow up seeing this version of her mother confident, independent, principled, and she'll understand that these qualities are normal and achievable rather than exceptional. She'll see that women can rebuild their lives after betrayal, that single motherhood can be a choice rather than a circumstance, that families can be strong and happy regardless of their structure. The letter I wrote for Emma when she was born has been joined by others, a collection of thoughts and explanations and promises that will help her understand her story when she's ready to hear it. But more importantly, she's growing up living the best parts of that story every day, the love, the security, the unwavering commitment to her well-being and happiness. Sometimes, when I'm putting Emma to bed and she's telling me about her day at daycare or asking questions about why flowers grow or whether butterflies dream, I think about the woman I was 2 years ago. The woman who was so grateful for the baby shower Madison threw, who felt so supported and loved, who had no idea that her life was about to explode. I don't miss that woman exactly, but I feel compassion for her. She was doing her best with the information she had, trying to build a life based on trust and gratitude and love. She couldn't have predicted that the people she trusted most would betray her so completely, and she couldn't have imagined that the betrayal would ultimately lead to something better. The truth about betrayal, I've learned, is that it reveals people rather than creating them. Madison was always capable of the choices she made. I just hadn't wanted to see it. Michael was always capable of prioritizing his own comfort over his family's well-being. I just hadn't tested that truth until circumstances forced the issue, but I was always capable of strength, independence, and fierce protectiveness of the people I love. The betrayal didn't create those qualities. It just gave me the opportunity to discover them. Emma calls to me from her sandbox, wanting to show me the castle she's built, and I set down my coffee to admire her architecture and hear her plans for the fairy garden she wants to plant next to it. These are the moments that matter now, not the drama of the past or the uncertainty of the future, but the daily reality of a life built on love, honesty, and the unshakable knowledge that some bonds really are too strong to break, not the bonds I thought I had with Madison or Michael, but the bond I have with my daughter, with the life we're building together, with the woman I've become through the process of refusing to let other people's choices define my worth or limit my possibilities. This is what happiness looks like after betrayal. Ordinary moments made extraordinary by the knowledge that they're freely chosen, honestly earned, and built on a foundation that no one can shake because no one else controls it. Emma runs toward me with sandy hands and a bright smile, ready to share her next adventure, and I open my arms to catch her, knowing that this laughter, this trust, this uncomplicated love is worth every difficult step it took to get here.